Repel. Reject. Create.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome back to the Repel, Reject, Create podcast. And my guest this time round is Lisa Van Wyk, a storytelling, communication, and content strategy and creative campaigner for international human rights and relief NGOs and nonprofits. She likes nothing better than discussing the ways AI might affect the way we use, think about, and relate to original and synthetic content. So good morning and welcome to the podcast, Lisa.
Thank you, Dave. It's good to be here.
Thank you. I like the way that you've kind of made this distinction between original and synthetic content. Now, when you're talking about creativity as this like human capacity, what on earth is the difference between original and synthetic?
So, I suppose it comes from the idea that, AI is designed to mimic a human brain. That is how, the mechanics of AI, how the machine works, the neural networks, it's modeled on the brain. And so what that really means is that the outputs really do resemble something that our brains might produce.
Right.
So it's very important to make a distinction between a synthetic piece of content which is made by an AI or made by a machine, as opposed to something which is organic, made by our human organic, sort of squishy brains. Simply because we just need a point of comparison. When you get into the nitty-gritty about what those differences might be, that depends on a whole bunch of things: the technology being used, the prompts, the methodologies in terms of how prompts are turned into outputs. There's a whole range of things, but the basic distinction is synthetic versus organic. And I just like that distinction because it really does draw into the idea that as humans, we have an organic, squishy brain where AI has a synthetic brain. And it also sort of allows people to kind of remember the idea that when AI produces content, when you're talking about generative AI specifically, remember there are lots of different types of AI, which have a whole bunch of functions in the world, and they've existed for a long time. But we're really sort of talking about a generative AI, which is where the conversation started a few years ago and why everyone is even talking about this now. When we speak about generative AI and the outputs of generative AI, it's important to remember that when an AI model or a tool or whatever it is that you're using creates what looks like something that a human could do, it's imitating it. It's right. Pretending that it can do that thing, or it's what's the word? Yeah, it's imitating. And so that's why I say it's synthetic. It's an artifice.
Right. Does that mean that you don't believe that AI is essentially being creative when it does this?
Yes, that's exactly it. And I think that's where the conversation gets really interesting, because it's mimicking creativity. It's mimicking innovation. And absolutely, AI can produce what looks like creativity. It can produce what looks like innovation. In fact, one of the key turning points in the development of AI was when AlphaGo, the game playing model, was developed many years ago. That machine showed innovation in its playing. And that was a major turning point in the history and development of AI and the understanding of neural networks and all those things. And there's a debate to this day as to whether that was innovation or just mimicking innovation or appearing to be innovative. So it's a very interesting thing. And I suppose it comes down to functional difference. So as an audience, do we relate to that content differently, knowing that it's AI versus organic? Right. It seems like there is a difference in how people do relate to it if they know. If they don't know, it's far more up in the air. So it's a very messy, overlapping space when you talk about synthetic versus organic content, because it comes into a whole range of things about like what do audiences think of it? What are the processes that go into the production of it? AI can be creative on paper in that what it produces might look like a creative solution, but then what was the prompt? Where was the creativity? Is the creativity in the prompt? Is it in the algorithm? Is it in what's being sucked in terms of the data set that it's been trained on? where is the creativity? There's so many ways to think about it and talk about it. But what it also does is it starts making you think about the way our own brains work.
Well, that's
Because
exactly what I was going to ask. Because that
yeah.
sounds like the same conundrum when we talk about human creativity. What
Oh,
is it actually? Where is it happening? And what is really going on when we join the dots to come up with new ideas?
yeah.
And isn't
Well,
that isn't that exactly what an AI is doing, joining dots?
exactly that. I mean, I think that one of the things, I mean, it's so easy to critique AI, and I understand every criticism of it. I mean, believe me, I'm not a defender of AI in any way, shape, or form. But I do think it's a very interesting way of starting to think about our own relationship to what we process and then reproduce.
Hmm.
Because if you think about, so AI is, and it's, if people don't understand how AI works, it's very important that they get a sense. And if you think of AI as it's a prediction model more than anything else. So it takes endless amounts of data, or a finite amount of data, but a huge amount of data. It draws patterns from it, and then it uses those patterns to predict possible outcomes that might be
Right.
correct, or might satisfy whatever that prompt might be. And that's kind of what we do. I mean, it does mean that what AI produces tends to be derivative. I mean, obviously there's something in that model which means that it is kind of derivative,
Right.
but humans tend to be quite derivative as well, unless they're really sort of forced into a space where they need to be creative, or that is the prompt, or that
Yeah.
is required of them. It takes a lot less effort to be derivative based on what you've sucked up from the world around you.
Right.
Um, and like I said, I don't want to demean human creativity in any of this, but it is interesting to see that the neural networks and how they work, they really do mimic our own
Yeah.
brains.
Well, I
Um,
think human creativity is overhyped, quite frankly. I think, the examples of really high, mind-blowing creativity are very different from everyday creativity, which most people exhibit. But I want to jump into this thing you just mentioned about AI essentially being predictive. Now, if you've read Nicholas Nassim Taleb's book, The Black Swan, the key thing that he says in there is, yes, human beings make predictions all the time. And in actual fact, we're really bad at it. If you look at the history of the world, it's obvious that we are bad at predicting what's going to happen next. Is that one of the biases which we are programming into AI, or is it free of that particular one and better at predicting than we are?
Well, I think it's interesting because, I mean, if you think about AI on the totality of AI. It's very easy, again, it's very easy to talk about AI and get very sucked into generative AI because
Mm.
that's kind of the visible output that we kind of understand and can reference. Um, so, I mean, AI is better at humans in many ways at predicting outcomes because it's better at picking up patterns. So it can pick up subtlety and patterns and can process more data than humans can. That's why we have AI, else there would be no purpose to developing it. And it would serve no function. So we know that AI is actually better than humans at predicting, but only based on what it is programmed with, only based on the
Right.
data it holds. What AI does not have is agility in terms of responding to a vast, quickly changing universe and context. So we already saw that was a problem when ChatGPT was launched, that it was trained up to a date on data that
Mhm.
existed up
Yeah.
to a date, and then it wouldn't, you couldn't do anything more with it after that date. And that changed because now it can actually search the web and search for new things.
Right.
So that's improved somewhat. But ultimately, whether it's generative AI or algorithmic AI, sort of the AI that is scraping together your behavior on Facebook and showing you what you want to see, it's doing a better job than humans at picking up patterns and predicting things.
Right.
Like, I mean, it's sort of justifying its own function that way.
Right. So
So I
is
would
this
say it's better. Yeah.
right? Is this why people say that it's actually much easier to build and design an AI-powered brain surgeon than an AI-powered waiter?
I would imagine that is. I mean, I've not heard that, but I would go with that completely. Yes, and we've actually seen. I mean, it's and what I think is really interesting, that my favorite sort of way of, when I speak to people, when I train people on AI ethics, And part of that is sort of getting people to understand what AI can and cannot do. And one of the things that's really obvious about AI, especially when you think of it as a predictive model, and I think it's one of the most useful ways to think about AI in terms of how agile it is as opposed to human agility, is that, the whole thing that AI can't do maths, right? So AI cannot do maths.
Right.
If you ask ChatGPT to do sums for you, it will get the wrong answers, right? It can't do maths. Current models, just like as I say that, like when I was telling people that 2 months ago, it has since changed, and now there are layers of coding that are layered on top of it because they fix it all the time. But 2 months ago, AI couldn't do math. And one of the reasons for that, it's to do with how when we predict something, we actually have a huge variation in what is an acceptable prediction, what actually fits the box. When we're talking about language, when we're talking about anything subjective. So if you ask AI to produce a sentence for you, there are a billion combinations of words it could come up with that would make sense and satisfy your prompt. If you ask it to do a sum, it has to get it right. So you are far more, you notice the errors when you ask AI to do maths. Because again, it's not actually doing maths, right? It's not programmed to do maths. It's pulling data in and predicting answers. So AI will guess that 2 + 2 is 4 because there is enough in the world in terms of evidence that that is the fact, that if it sees 2 + 2 = 4, 2 + 2, the pattern in the universe will tell him that the answer is 4. If you tell it to times 465,332 by another like random number, it's not going to find the right answer. And I actually had a really funny conversation the other day where I was sitting with an engineering professor who I know, who didn't know that this was a limitation of AI and has been using AI to summarize notes and things like that, and has been putting mathematical errors into engineering notes and documents.
Ouch.
Not knowing that, yeah.
Well, I did not know this, and I kind of, I'd like to consider myself fairly well informed about the capacities of AI. So that's fascinating. So really is now this is not because one of the big conceptions I think around AI is its precision. It's an algorithm, it's programmed, it's all of this language modeling that's been going on. And yet you're telling me that actually the more precise the prompt, the less likely it is to be able to predict a good answer.
Yeah, because it's that we will notice the error more immediately. That's the thing. So remember, when someone asks a question with a subjective answer, you've got this range of possible correct answers or acceptable answers. And with AI, that's very obvious, because as soon as you get into the world of like yes or no, truth, fact, hard, objective fact, it might get it wrong.
Okay.
Depending on, but again, it very much depends on what data it's been fed and how it's been trained. But
this is why AI is probably more interesting in creative spheres, therefore, where there are multiple satisfactory answers.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's also one of the reasons that people, if they're not careful and if they're not sort of AI literacy is a kind of very like crappy buzzword at the moment, but no one really knows what it means. But when people are using AI, it's very important to them, I feel very strongly that it's very important for them to understand what AI is doing so that they can actually evaluate the response, I suppose, a little bit more critically and go, is this, what else is in this answer? What has been pulled into this answer? AI is not Google. AI is not a calculator. AI is not an encyclopedia. It's pulling things from the data and producing a likely answer. It's doing things with your prompt to say, produce a creative output, if you're talking about generative AI and using it for creative sort of artistic purpose. And if you sort of don't understand that what it's giving you is merely one of 55 possible answers to your prompt, you're not going to know that you could or should adjust, reprompt. It's very important, for example, to make sure that your prompt is very specific, so that
to reduce the probability factor.
Yeah. But then the more specific your prompt gets, the more creativity lies in the prompter and less in the machine. You see what I'm saying? Because
okay. So you kind of, so it's quite limited if you want to get too specific, but if you're not specific enough, you're going to get overly generic stuff that has a high error factor. In other words, in order to get really interesting answers out of AI at the moment, generative AI at the moment, you need to exhibit a hell of a lot of creativity in order to get into the right place. And you've still got to analyze and evaluate that answer and decide what to do with it.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't take your eye off the prize at all throughout any of this process
Wow.
if you care about the quality of the results.
That's a very interesting answer.
Yeah.
No one said that to me so far. So you're talking about a probability engine. Your answers are probable answers, not the answer.
Yes, exactly that. And sometimes, I mean, it can be, I mean, AI can surprise and delight. I mean, I'll be honest with you, it
Yeah.
can do that. I mean, I have a friend of mine adopted chickens, pet chickens, and we asked AI to name these chickens for us because we wanted like funny music related names. And one of them is now called Yoko Ono.
Oh, yeah,
YOLKO. Yeah. And
wow.
we would never in a million years have come up with Yoko Ono in a million years. But AI pulled it from somewhere.
Yeah.
And there's so many examples of that. AI being genuinely quite delightful in its answer.
Yeah.
But I think that's luck of the draw more than anything
Right.
else.
Right.
It's nothing inherent in the quality of what AI produces, I'll be very
I
honest
mean,
with
that's
you.
a probable answer because chickens have
Yeah.
egg yolk. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, what about the ethics of all of this? I mean, what about copyright? How do I've heard of authors who can't get books published because they've used AI and now the publishers are scared of the copyright issues. And what are the ethics of all of that? All of this large language model programming and the right of human beings to hold, intellectual property rights.
Well, I suppose, this is the, one of the problems with the development of AI, so like so many technologies, is that the sort of regulation and rules around it sort of, there's a word for it. It means it's the lag that sort of
Yeah.
comes, regulatory lag that about. And so we've seen that with AI, where it's a little bit of a catch-22, where it probably would not have been possible to get to where we are in terms of AI development, and certainly AI in terms of mass rollout and mass accessibility, if the companies that developed AI were not stealing at the beginning. That's the sad truth, because you need so much data
Yeah.
in order to get a large language model programmed for general use in the way something like ChatGPT has been done. I mean, remember also, ChatGPT is one example.
Yeah.
There's
It's not the only
multiple
one.
small, there's multiple small specialist GPTs as well that people create, etc., etc. But again, we can talk about like the layers of accessibility and why there's an inequality in the development of AI as well, because now the rules have come in and no one can afford to buy data legally to challenge ChatGPT, for example. But yeah, I mean, it is a massive ethical issue, because I think, and there's so many legal loopholes that basically exist because at the time, things like, for example, Creative Commons licenses were put out into the world. Training AI models were never part of public use and fair use. So something might be out in the world for free use, but everyone who gave their copyright away using Creative Commons, as an example, I'm just saying, if you were only sticking to sort of publicly available data, no one could predict that their work would be used to create generic work that imitates their work. You know what I'm saying? So it's a massively problematic lag. There's a loophole there because the technology has outshot our response to the technology, or our prediction that the technology would go there.
Right. I mean, does copyright need to change? I mean, is that just an industrial age construct that needs to change?
I would argue that it would absolutely need to change, in the same way that copyright once upon a time never included digital reproduction. Yes.
Right.
So, so those kinds of laws around creative outputs need to be adjusted to take on whatever tech is using them or scraping from them, or whatever might be the case. But it's a slow process, unfortunately. And
Yeah.
so I do think that there's a lot of artists who've been caught out in the first sort of wave of AI production, in terms of things being generative and generic, using their source material. They're going to have a big problem trying to claw that back.
Yeah.
And we've seen that they have. I think there's been very little, if any, kind of successful
Yeah.
case against. I mean, like I know, for example, like I know that it's less a creative sort of artistic output, but the New York Times, for example, has an ongoing court case against ChatGPT for scraping its articles. It's still ongoing, and that's the New York Times with massive money and clout behind it. Imagine an artist sitting somewhere in Cape Town is going to do if
Yeah.
it's an unfortunate thing, and I think that is the at this moment in time. I mean, there are a lot of dangers with AI, there are a lot of harms with AI, but that I think is the most immediate one that people can get their head around. That AI is again imitating. It is acting like a plagiarist, and we don't allow that in humans. There's no reason we should allow that in machine models.
Wow.
There's
I
no
think
reason.
that's a good place for us to stop, because that's a pretty bold statement. Thank you so much, Lisa, for coming onto the podcast. It's been awesome talking to you.
Cool.
If you want to know more about Lisa and the work that she does, please check out all of her links that are in the show notes under this episode. And don't forget to rebel and reject so that you can create. Until next time, ciao.